Well, how do you feel about the fact that right now we're, in the middle of a massive affordability problem, and California is the tip of the spear for that. 15% of California residents right now can afford the average
Yeah.
home
Been that way
in
for
California.
decades. It's a
So,
major crisis.
so I mean, when you hear the things that Joe Rogan is saying, and we on this podcast battle back and forth with Joe Rogan and that type of politic and that thinking all the time. But when you hear that, there is a cohort of people that feel like the state is too expensive for them. They
Has
can't
been.
live the American dream here. They can't afford a home here. And that could have explained some of the exodus that you saw to places like Austin or Florida or the places like that where things might.
Well, we per capita, more Floridians moving to California than Californians moving to Florida.
Mhm.
Our population's been growing over year to year to year. I mean, he's just making that stuff up. That's why he don't want me on the show.
Right.
He's
Specifically to
literally
affordability of homes and
making it
things
up.
like that.
Now, on
What
the
are your
issue of
thoughts?
affordability, it explains more things in more ways on more days about problems in California, issues of housing, supply-demand imbalance. Been that case for decades now. We're as dumb as we want to be. We've got to get out of our own way. We got to build more damn housing. That's why I literally tied my budget last year to the most significant housing reforms in California history. That's why I'm about to sign one of the most significant housing bills in years in California as it relates to density bonuses around transit corridors. We're moving from a NIMBY mindset, not in my backyard,
Yeah.
to this YIMBY mindset, and we're being very aggressive. Let me be more specific. Not only are we promoting reforms in terms of the regulatory system that's slowing down development of more housing to address the affordability challenge. But I also created a housing accountability unit where we're quite literally suing cities that are not producing enough housing. The state of California has a state of mind that is completely aligned with that critique. And that's why we've been very aggressive, because at the end of the day, forgive the vernacular, localism is determinative, meaning state's vision is realized locally. We don't build the housing, we create the conditions. And so cities like Huntington Beach refuse to even zone housing,
Right.
let alone build housing. So we sued them. This affordability framework is not complicated. It's Econ 101. And we have been more robust in the reforms with this abundance mindset, Ezra Klein talking a lot about that, and we're aligned with that. And so it is the issue that explains the big critique that is completely legitimate
Right.
as it relates to the state of California and has been for decades and decades. And it's the one issue that I'm most proud that we've tackled in terms of policy changes head on. But the rationalization of those policies need to be promoted and realized ultimately locally. And that's something that needs to take shape. And that's why we're being very aggressive. And it hasn't yet. And it's also something taking shape all across the country.
Sure.
There's the affordability issue is the issue that defines, I think, the greatest stress for people 30 and younger in this country,
Yeah.
and why they are increasingly tapped out of both political parties and pissed off because we're not delivering for them. And so housing, amen, man, is the legitimate claim of critique in this state.
Do you think this affordability issue, even in Northern California, San Francisco used to be the mayor, just so people know, you have an $18 minimum wage there, and the average one-bedroom home is a one-bedroom apartment, should I say, is $3,000 a month. Do you think that this issue is a broader issue that has to do with maybe a critique and controls on American capitalism? California, for example, has, hosted and been very giving and loving and nurturing to a lot of the Silicon Valley companies that have come here and called Northern California home. And that has resulted in breathtaking income inequality and affordability issues for the regular people of California, the average people. And that's something that we've seen explode across the country as Americans seem to be left behind by their government in favor of the richest 1% of the country. How do we deal with that in a more broad sense than just looking at it?
So, so that's a foundational question about free enterprise and capitalism, and that's an issue for a 30-year trend line that's now a headline as it relates to wealth, not just income inequality.
Well, I actually meant to say wealth. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, that's underscored by the fact that you have quite literally 2/3 the wealth in the hands of just 10% of the population. That same 10%, by the way, that's about 50% of consumer spending in this country. And so it's increasingly in the hands of fewer and few people. And that's why people like Bernie Sanders are so resonant and so popular and have such a strong base.
Zohran
Because,
Mamdani as well.
and yeah, people like that understand that fundamentally and foundationally. Now, to understand is not to achieve any outcome, meaning one identifying a problem is one thing, actually what you do to promote it. So our philosophy, my philosophy, and the work we've done here in the state is about, yes, growth. We promote it. It's a point of pride, innovation, entrepreneurialism. I don't want to stifle that. I'm one of those Democrats, with all due respect, I don't begrudge other people's success. I admire the hell out of it. I'm someone that comes from a private sector background. I opened a small restaurant and wine store right out of college. One part-time employee, Pat Kelly, and she passed away a year and a half ago. God bless her. Started with pen to paper, $7,500, and got 13 investors and built that to 21 small businesses, about 1,000 employees. And I'm not saying that to impress you, but to impress upon you my passion for entrepreneurialism. So I want to make that clear. But I'm also not naive that businesses can't thrive in a world that's failing. And that's what you've just described. And that's why this notion of growth has to also be attached to inclusion. And so our framework goes like this. You mentioned the $18 minimum wage. I have a thing or two that I can say about this because I've got some receipts. As a former mayor that promoted that minimum wage back then, 118, but it's adjusted for inflation, that promoted a minimum wage in the state of California. Let me be even more specific. I am the only governor that can claim this. I got a lot of shit for this and continue to get a lot of shit for this.
I love that you didn't ask if you could curse.
No, sorry.
You can,
But you
by the
can.
way.
Well,
Yes.
you start with Joe Rogan, so I'm going to start cursing.
Right.
$20 minimum wage for fast food workers. And I worked my ass off with SEIU to get that done. And by the way, they're not even members of that union, but their cause is social and racial justice, because that is about economic, social, and racial justice. Disproportionate number of women work in fast food. And they're not just young kids now working summer jobs there, they're working full time. And why the hell should someone be working full time in a major corporation that ends up on damn welfare, ends up on the public dole? I also promoted and supported a $25 minimum wage for healthcare workers. That doesn't exist anywhere in the United States. Not just the baseline minimum wage, the largest earned income tax credit in the United States of America. And we extended it for I-10 holders. And I know that offends people like that and others as it relates to those without immigration status. Points of pride. I also believe that our interventions come too late. So we're having a systemic conversation. People are not left behind, they start behind. And that's why I have focused effort on prenatal care, which is under-focused and under-resourced, on pre-Head Start, not just Head Start. And I literally just came, no bullshit, just came from a press conference with the Unified School District superintendent here in LA, promoting the fact that we just saw significant increases in test scores that disproportionately outperformed the nation for Black and Latino students in every subject matter and every grade and every cohort. But I also promoted our interventions where we created a brand new grade, pre-K for all, and how important pre-K is for everyone. After school for all, $4.4 billion this year, 9 hours of enrichment, including 30 days of summer school. I'm giving you a long answer because there's no flippant response to the systemic issues that you highlight that need to be addressed in this country. And I'm proud of that work, proud of the work with 200,000 new slots for childcare and subsidizing childcare in this state, and the work we're trying to do across the spectrum of affordability, including the largest tax rebate in U.S. history, $18.6 billion, which Rogan is not even aware of and doesn't give a damn about. And so all those things matter, but I'll conclude on this. What also matters is tax policy, which goes to, I think, your core of your question and sort of the appeal of people like Mandani, and to that extent, people like Bernie. California has a progressive tax structure. That's the real reason a lot of these folks left.
Right.
Come on, let's have this conversation.
Yeah.
They don't like progressive tax. They like regressive tax policy. Where's Rogan live? In one of the most regressive tax states in America that tax poor people more. Poor people are taxed more than the richest 1%. In Texas, places like Florida. That's what they celebrate. They promote. They are high tax states, but not for them.
Mm-hmm.
You can't claim California is a high tax state. High tax for who? The 1%. Progressive tax state. Regressive taxes persist in these red states, particularly these large red states. And I think that is a state of mind that also is something that I believe in and needs to be promoted in relationship to your question around wealth and income inequality. And I'll tell you, it was interesting. I had on my podcast Steve Bannon, who was making a case. He didn't say the word California, but he sure as hell sounded like someone making the case for California's tax policy. Again, the same policy that Elon Musk and Rogan and all these guys decry and criticize.
Do you see California as a model for a more populist Democratic Party? And do you think that the Democrats need a clear economic populist message?
100%. Look, the issue of our time is cost of living, period, full stop, period, full stop. And this is, I talked about 30 and younger, but with intention. 30-year-olds are the first generation in history of this country where 30-year-olds are not doing better than their parents. And they're pissed. I mean, I was, I'm doing these gaming podcast platforms, just listening to young folks call, and they're pissed. They're like, they had some sensibility that maybe Trump was the real deal and they wanted change. And some, we saw the numbers reflect, they kind of came on board multiculturally, not just white dudes.
Mostly
And
white dudes.
but yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's right. But young men, broadly, that just feel, by the way, that are in crisis in terms of, dropout rates and suicide rates that are 4x. Girls, the issues around, just achievement gaps and even just college going young men versus women. I mean, this is a crisis, what's happening to young men. And the Republican Party, at least, attached themselves, that Rogan, to his credit, sort of attached himself to that manosphere, but they've kind of exploited it. And they haven't done anything to address the underlying issues. The Democratic Party hasn't either. But we didn't even talk about it. And so we need to own that because it goes fundamentally to the issue of a populist economic message, address the issue of cost of living, and address this crisis that's going on with young men, but also crisis of opportunity that people are feeling in a society of haves and have-nots. And so, this is the issue. Right now, we also have the issue situationally of Donald Trump. And so how do you promote solutions and a strategy for a positive alternative to Trump and Trumpism? At the same time, you're dealing with this existential threats of this lawlessness that's occurring in real time all across this country with Trump, where he wants to replace the rule of law with the rule of dawn. And so that's the sort of dialectic I think we're having as Democrats, is how to balance both, because people want us, that's what Mandani's done effectively, to be focusing on those pocketbook issues. But for me, that tension in the most un-Trump state in America is how we balance those two.